Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. All this week we're celebrating the museum's 20th anniversary. That's right, we've been a museum for almost as long as we were actively steaming, at 22 years over the last half century. So, in some of the videos this week we've talked about some museum ships or some potential museum ships that were not able to be turned into museums. We've talked about ships that, what to do when you get a museum ship. And today, we're going to talk about the first 20 years of Battleship New Jersey's life as a museum, and a little bit about what's standard in that you can expect over the first 20 years of pretty much any museum, not just museum ships. So we are standing near the signing wall. One of the things I love about Battleship New Jersey, and this has been around since longer than I've worked here, so I can't claim credit for it or anything, is that every time a veteran of this ship, and we estimate that there were as many as 55,000 over the ship's career, every time one comes back to the museum, we have them sign the signing wall. So we're still a far cry away from getting everybody's signature, and we may well never see another World War II veteran come back on to sign, so who we haven't gotten, we just aren't going to be able to. But I think this is a tremendous memorial that we have here. And it's very important because if something ever happens to the ship, this wall is completely removable. And if we haven't already talked about that, it's in our future video, What Does the Future Hold for Museum Ships? But this wall was designed with the idea that we can take it down and display it in a shoreside museum if needed. Groups formed while this ship was still in service. Prior to her being reactivated for the Vietnam War, members from her World War II and Korean crew had already gotten together and started talking about turning the ship into a museum ship. We've talked about this a number of times in the past, but the first permanently operating modern museum ship was the Battleship Texas, which opened in 1948, so just after World War II. By the 60s and 70s, we get into really the high water mark of new museum ships being formed. And so you see other battleships like Massachusetts, Alabama, and North Carolina all being opened. You also see some of the first aircraft carrier museums, and a number of the other smaller ships are turned into museum ships at this time as well. And so folks from the state of New Jersey and folks associated with the battleship started to get together and say, hey, can we turn her into the first Iowa-class battleship museum? Well, as you probably know, that didn't happen because the ship was reactivated for Vietnam. And post-Vietnam, she goes into mothballs, and people ask again, but at that point, New Jersey is the most modernized of the Iowas. And so the Navy keeps her in the reserve fleet, like the other Iowa-class battleships. And then, of course, she's brought back in the 80s and decommissioned in 91 for the last time so far. And so, at that point, other organizations formed. Many of those earlier groups we've talked about had already aged out, but the idea continued. And around 1999, the Strom-Thurmond Defense Act said that, yeah, we'll take the two most historically significant Iowas and turn them into museums, and we only need to keep two in reserves. At this point, it's been almost a decade that they've been sitting in reserves yet again, even though they were relatively recently modernized. So it was selected that Missouri and New Jersey would be opened as museum ships. Both of these ships were in mothballs at Bremerton, side by side, Bremerton, Washington. And both of these ships faced challenges in deciding where they were going to go. Missouri probably spent more time in Bremerton than she did anywhere else. So an organization in Bremerton opened and said, hey, we want to turn that battleship into a museum here. Likewise, an organization in Pearl Harbor opened up and said, we would love to turn her into a museum here near the Arizona Memorial. And both submitted applications, and eventually the Pearl Harbor group was selected. A similar thing happens with Battleship New Jersey, in that multiple groups in the state of New Jersey said that they wanted the ship in their city. And initially, there were proposals out that cities could provide to the state, and eventually full-fledged groups formed around some of these cities. So basically, there was a group that wanted to bring the battleship to the Camden, Philadelphia area in South Jersey, and another group that wanted to take the battleship to North Jersey. And the governor and the Secretary of the Navy both said, hey, we're not going to throw our support one way or the other. Submit your applications, and whichever one of you does the best job with the paperwork will have the ship. And so it was the Camden Group, the Home Port Alliance for USS New Jersey, that was awarded the ship by the Navy in around the year 2000. Now, interestingly, the battleship was in the West Coast in Bremerton, which meant she had to be towed all the way to the state of New Jersey. This caused a problem because the United States was about to turn over the Panama Canal to the government of Panama. Battleship New Jersey barely fits through the Panama Canal at 108 foot 3 inches wide for a 110 foot canal, so about 10 inches on each side, which is tough enough when you've got 2,000 guys on board, but this was going to be a dead ship tow. The ship was not making her own power or propulsion, and she didn't have a full crew. So it ended up being the most expensive tow through the canal, and it was expedited because the government knew we've got to do it now, because there's no way the Panamanian government's going to take over their canal and then decide, oh yeah, let's let this really dangerous thing happen. So even before it had been decided where the battleship was going to end up, it was decided that she would be towed around, but not just New Jersey, because then it meant both remaining battleships were on the East Coast in the reserve fleet. So one of them, and it was eventually selected to be USS Iowa, was going to be towed around after New Jersey had come to the East Coast, and Iowa would be taken out to the West Coast to be held in reserve there. So New Jersey comes around. The state of New Jersey pays for both Iowa and New Jersey to go around so that they can have their ship in their home state. And New Jersey ends up being the only Iowa-class battleship to be displayed in her home state. The museum is created, an organization is chosen to do that. They had to create a lot of their core documents and paperwork and have a lot of their core staff on hand already. At this point, from about 2000, when the ship arrives in the Philadelphia Navy Yard, up until October of 2001, a lot of the restoration work that we talked about in the So What Do You Do Now That You Have a Museum Ship episode took place. So one thing that I thank God every day for that they did is they cleaned out all the fuel tanks. Iowa-class battleships have somewhere between 300 and 600 tanks, depending on who's counting. And if there's still residual fuel in these tanks, and they are stored in mothballs with something like 20% of their fuel on hand just in case. So getting all these tanks cleaned out means it's going to be much more easier doing hot work on the hull afterwards. Other things they had to do there, the ship sat in reserve for 10 years. So things that rusted, paint had peeled, major pieces of equipment like the Tomahawk armored box launchers, the phalanx, the radars had all been stripped off. And so a lot of work had to be done to restore this stuff. So then it was decided the ship was going to be brought to South Jersey, and so a facility had to be built for her. The river had to be dredged out, a pier had to be built, a visitor center had to be built. So while all this was taking place, the ship was towed from the Philadelphia Navy Yard to the Broad Street Terminal here in Camden so that volunteers could get on board and do a lot of the painting and prep work and set up some of the earliest tour route spaces. So that took at least a year of work. And in 2000, the Battleship Missouri opens up. New Jersey takes a little bit longer. And it's not until October of 2001 that she opens up. Somebody threw a wrench in those gears. The World Trade Center was bombed. Battleship New Jersey spent a fair amount of time in the 80s in the Middle East. And so there were concerns that a vessel like this might make a target for a terrorist attack. So even though a lot of the volunteers who did work on this ship, getting her ready, had been told that they were going to be allowed to ride the ship when she came to her final destination, it ended up that the Coast Guard moved the ship to her completed pier, basically in the middle of the night without any fanfare. And so there's a number of volunteers and staff at this organization who are still upset that they missed out on what they were promised. But it's understandable why that was. These were very uncertain days when the museum opened. All right, so you got everything ready. Your museum opens. If your museum is something that people actually want to see, odds are you're going to have a real good first couple of years. And that was the case for Battleship New Jersey, with hundreds of thousands of people visiting every single year for roughly the first 5 years. So it's new, it's exciting. People want to come and see it for the first time. And that's the case for most new museums when they open. You don't have to do anything special. You just throw your doors open and people come through. Well, then it gets old. Everybody who was interested in the subject has come and seen it already. And if there's nothing new going on, they're not going to come back. So oftentimes, after that first 5-year boom, museums will go through something like a 10-year slump. And so that absolutely happened with Battleship New Jersey. The numbers dropped back down to, just how many visitors are coming to the local area, things like that. News stories stopped coming out about the ship. So less people were hearing about her, so less people knew she was there. And this is very common for museums of all sorts. And during that period, a museum has to decide what sort of institution it's going to be. Are you a veterans memorial primarily? Are you a children's museum primarily? Are you a science center? What sort of site are you? And what are you doing that's innovative, that's getting people on board? And so the Battleship New Jersey is still figuring all of that out now. And just before the pandemic started, we saw our baseline numbers starting to climb back up. We started to figure out what we were. And then put a stop to things with the pandemic. So, some of the work that the museum did during this time of trying to discover ourselves and become something was open up a lot of the tour route. So coming up with guided programs through the engineering spaces and through the guns and other classroom programs like that has been a huge thing that the museum has done in recent years. Major maintenance projects to keep the ship going. The entire hull has been painted once. It's coming due again. We're in the middle of redecking the ship. That's probably the biggest capital project that we've done as far as restoring a part of the vessel. So, if you want to hear about what comes next in the future of the ship, there's a link in the description to the video released yesterday. And today, we're releasing this one on the last 20 years. Because today, October 15th, 2021, is the 20th anniversary. Now, we're celebrating this anniversary tomorrow on October 16th, 2021. So it's a Saturday. And we're doing the celebration by rolling back our ticket prices to how they were 20 years ago. And also, many of our volunteers who have been on board for all that time are going to be spaced out throughout the tour route to talk with guests while they're coming through. So be sure you come out and celebrate with us. 20 years is a major milestone for any museum, and here's for 20 more to come. What's your favorite thing that Battleship New Jersey has done over the last 20 years? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your continued support, and there's a link in the description below if you'd like to support us more going forward. You can also support the museum by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about us and what we're doing. Thanks for watching.